Good day, teachers. I am Alnerzi Dumagco. Together with my group mates, Majin Panugaling and Kern Daryl Ponce, we are from the Bachelor of Physical Education. Today, we're all about to discuss our title proposal. Our title number 1 is all about physical activities and physical health status of the BPA students in UMTC. So why we come up with this kind of title or study? We come up with this study is because it is related to our course. At the same time, we would like to do research about how physical activities affects the physical health status of the BPA students because most of the time, BPA students are engaging various physical activities. In our statement of the problem, particularly in the global issues, according to Al-Haza HM 2004, in Saudi Arabia, physical inactivity is a public health issue. Saudi Arabia's recent economic development spurt implies that the country now confronts difficulties in combating chronic health issues associated with food, sedentary lifestyles, and other behavioral changes. To improve cardiovascular and muscular fitness, bone health, and depression, the World Health Organization people aged 18 to 64 should do at least 150 minutes of moderate to intensity cardio per week or a mix of acceptable and intense exercise according to the current recommendation. In the global issue, stated the effect of the physical inactivity to the health behavior of the individual in Saudi Arabia. Thus, physical activities gives an impact to improve and overcome those health problems and promote healthy lifestyle of those individuals. For the national issue, according to Pituk and Kagas 2019, in the Philippines, particularly in Metro Manila, the university students have a poor understanding of physical activity levels and fitness. According to a recent study in global trends, in insufficient physical activity, almost 40% of Filipinos are insufficiently active. Given the physical inactivity is a recognized risk factor for many chronic illnesses, these figures are worrisome. In this national issue stated, it emphasized the lack of physical activities of those students in Metro Manila. Also, with that improper lifestyle, it took them to affect their health behaviors because of not engaging physical activities. For our local setting, particularly in the University of Mindanao Tagum College, according to my observation, some students have difficulty engaging in physical exercise, which result in harmful impact on their physical health. Some students are not active for such activity since they feel tired, particularly if they have following class sessions. Therefore, they do not frequently participate in some physical fitness sessions. Also, some are doing improper healthy lifestyle like eating unhealthy foods without engaging physical activities. As a result of the absence of physical activity, their physical health suffers and they become physically inactive. For our objective of the study, the main concern of this study is to determine the relationship between physical activities and physical health status of the BPA students in UMTC. This study is aimed to seek the answer for the following question. Number 1. To determine the level of physical activities in terms of aerobics, weight training, dancing, and self-defense class. Number 2. To determine the level of physical health status of the students in terms of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Number 3. Is there a significant relationship between the physical activities and physical health status among BPA students? For our research gap, it helps us to address the physical inactive of the students in UMTC that affects their physical health status. This research gap still has a limited information, needs a further research, thus the needs to conduct this established. The reason why we prompt to propose this research because we want to remove and solve the problem of physical inactive because it affects the health status of every student, especially their physical health status. By the help of our study, we want to give conclusion about the effects of physical activities to the physical health status of students that somehow give encouragement to pursue doing physical activities. This will also benefits the students, teachers, community in solving this research problem. For our theoretical lens, this study is anchored on the study of two theories which are self-efficacy theory and self-determination theory. According to Duncan et al. 2000, The theory of self-efficacy utilizes a range of health and physical activity concepts such as weight loss and exercise. Self-efficacy affects people objectives that generally believe their ability to persevere in the face of adversity and their ability to deal with setbacks and stress. According to the authors, self-efficacy for physical activity walking and identified adherence and dropouts in physical activity therapies are already anticipating. Additionally, self-efficacy will vary along with the aspect of size, intensity, and flexibility. The writers included several activities that are popular high school students, including aerobics, weight training, dancing, and self-defense classes. On the other hand, as per self-determination theory provided by Deci and Ryan 2008, some people engage in regular physical activity merely for the pleasure of doing so. Others seem to exercise to get internal or extrinsic benefits such as losing their weight, improve attractiveness, or acknowledgement from those important to them. According to several studies, those who exercise for pleasure rather than intrinsic or extrinsic incentives are more likely to stick to a specific fitness regimen. The theory of self-determination, on the other hand, has been widely applied to the study of exercise behavior in people who do not presently fulfill the current physical activity guidelines. Furthermore, the theory proposes that individuals have three basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy refers to being the perceived origin of source of one's own behavior. Competence refers to feeling effective in one's ongoing interaction with the social environment and experiencing opportunities of fulfillment, while relatedness refers to the feeling connected to the others and to have a feeling of belongingness with the individual and the community. For our conceptual framework, explaining the concept, model shown in the schematic diagram, the upper box on the left side represents the physical activities which composes of aerobics, weight training, dancing, and self-defense class in increasing order of physical activities for physical health status. This variable shows how this physical activity affect on physical health status of BPA students as the subject of the study. In the upper right box, represent the physical health status which compose the three indicators as identified by self-determination theory, which are the autonomy, competence, and relatedness as the focus. This variable will explain on BP students' physical health status by utilizing three indicators in determining the level of influence of physical activities as part of our objectives in this study. And here are the 5 review of related literature. For our methodology, this study made us use of the quantitative, non-experimental research design utilizing correlation technique. It describes the influence between the indicators of the physical activity and physical health status of BPE students. This design adapted correlation technique to determine the influences of physical activity and physical health status of BPE students. For the research participants will be the Bachelor of Physical Education students from University of Mindanao Tagum College. For our data procedures, here are the following instructions. Number 1, seeking permission to conduct the study. Number 2, administration and retrieval of questionnaires. Number 3, checking and collating and processing of data. For ethical standards and consideration were observed all throughout the study. To make sure that the study followed the necessary ethical procedures, we must consider the social value, informed consent, vulnerability of research participants, privacy and confidentiality of information, justice, transparency, qualifications of the researcher, adequacy of facilities, and community involvement. And here are the references for our study. So that's the end of our presentation for our first title. Thank you for listening and God bless.
Good day, teachers. I'm Majin A. Panugaling. Together with my group mates Alner Dumagco and Kern Darrell Ponce, we are from the Bachelor of Physical Education. Today, we are going to discuss our title proposal. Our title number 2 is about the effect of teaching physical education in a new normal on academic performance among the BPE students in UMTC. So why we come up with this kind of title? We come up with this title in line to our course because we observe that most of the BPE students are having difficulties in online teaching and learning towards their academic performance, especially with their major subjects. And also we observe that most of them have changes in their behavioral growth, like they are being unproductive and always procrastinating, that we think it will result to have a low academic performance. In our statement of the problem, particularly in the global issues, according to Hollis et al. 2017, the majority of the pupils in physical education classes in the United States are unlikely to meet the national curriculum criteria for K-12 students. Furthermore, while Shape America advises that students engage in vigorous or moderate physical activity for at least 50% of their physical education class time, this goal is frequently missed by traditional face-to-face physical education programs. For our local setting, particularly in the University of Mindanao Tagum College, according to our observation, that most of the BPE students, since the start of the pandemic and school closures, highly affects them. Students taking online physical education classes are having a hard time or difficulties to complete their tasks on time. Also, they do not have adequate room to engage in physical activities successfully. Students also have limited access to the tools and equipment required to complete online physical fitness coursework, especially doing physical activities and accomplishing academic performances. We also observe that the changes of their behavior in complying with their tasks. Students are being unproductive and always procrastinating, that we think may result in low academic performance, not performing better in online class setting than in traditional learning. For our objectives of the study, the main concern of this study is to determine the relationship between teaching of physical education in a new normal setting and its effect to the academic performance of the BPE students in UMTC. This study aims to seek the answers for the following questions. Number 1, to determine the level of teaching physical education in a new normal in terms of competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Number 2, to determine the level of academic performance of BPE students in terms of grades. Number 3, is there a significant relationship between teaching physical education in a new normal setup and its effect to the academic performance of the students? And for our research gap, in our study, the research gap will help to address the teaching of physical education in a new normal and its effect on academic performance among BPE students. The researcher has not come across a study that specifically discussed the effect on academic performance among BPE students in UMTC, but also on how the respondents cope up the situation online class setup. Furthermore, this study will provide relevant concepts that would possibly help the future researcher. The reason why we prompted to propose this study because we want to solve the problem of online class setup in physical education because it affects the academic performance of every student. By the help of our study, we want to give conclusions about the effect of teaching physical education in a new normal on academic performance of the students that somehow will give encouragement to always give their best to whatever task given to achieve a high grades. This would also benefit the students, teachers, and community in solving this research problem. And for our theoretical lens, this study is anchored on the study of two theories, which are self-determination theory and self-efficacy. According to Deci and Ryan 2000, self-determination theory is a theory based on motivation that seeks to define the underlying needs of persons that might influence their experiences and performance in a particular circumstances. It is based on three basic dimensions: competence, autonomy, and relatedness, which are all related to the aforementioned students' needs. More precisely, competence is linked to students' desire to feel capable in order to engage in the learning process successfully. Autonomy refers to the desire to carry out duties independently in an environment that is meaningful to them, and relatedness, the need to be engaged in tasks that allow collaboration and conversation with other students. And in connection to our study, in order for the students to achieve a high grades, high performance, to comply the task completely and to avoid being unproductive and procrastinating, students must need self-determination, especially now online class. Having a COVID-19 pandemic, it's not easy for the students, especially the BPE students, that is more on performances and coursework. Self-determination is indeed important to BPE students to help themselves accomplish the task. We also have the supporting theory, which is the self-efficacy theory. According to Bandura, the theory of self-efficacy suggests that the motive or value one places on accomplishing a task has a great influence on whatever or not there are relationships among self-efficacy beliefs, motivational intentions, and attributions. By that, self-efficacy is also being connected because teaching and learning in a new normal involves self-efficacy, and having low achieving students seems to be particularly influenced by the level of self-efficacy in predicting their academic motivation. Self-efficacy may impact a person's motivation to perform the given task completely, that may result to get a high grades. And for our conceptual framework, explaining the concept model shown in the schematic diagram, the upper box on the left side represents the teaching of physical education in a new normal, which comprises of competence, autonomy, and relatedness. This variable shows how the teaching of physical education in a new normal setup affects the academic performance of the BPE students as the subject of this study. The upper right box represents the academic performance of a student. This variable will explain the BPE student's academic performance by utilizing the indicator, which is the grade, in determining the level of influence of teaching physical education in a new normal as part of our objectives in this study. And for our methodology, this study made use of the quantitative non-experimental research design utilizing correlation technique. It describes the influences between the indicators of teaching physical education in a new normal and academic performance of the BPE students. This design adopted correlation technique to determine the influences of teaching physical education in a new normal and the academic performance of the BPE students. For the research participants will be the Bachelor of Physical Education students from the University of Mindanao, Tagum College. For our data procedures, here are the following instructions. Number 1, seeking permission to conduct the study. Number 2, administration and retrieval of questionnaires. Number 3, checking, collating, and processing of data. And for the ethical standards and the ethical considerations were observed all throughout the study. To make sure that the study will follow the necessary ethical procedures, we must consider the social value, informed consent, vulnerability of research participants, privacy and confidentiality of information, justice, transparency, qualifications of the researcher, adequacy of the facilities, and community involvement. And here are the references for our study so that the end and here are the references for our study. So that's the end of our presentation for our second title. Thank you.
Good day everyone, my name is Colonel Ponce, together with the proponent of this study, Alner Dumagco and Majin Panugaling. This is the title number 3, which is the struggles of student athletes dealing with stress and pressure both in sports and class towards their academic performance. According to an article of O'Neill, Allen, and Calder 2013, high-performance school athletes struggles to balance the demands both of their sporting and educational roles. They are like hyphen individuals striving to deal with more than one life. This investigation examines the views of talented athletes who are full-time school students to elicit their perspective of how they deal with the pressures to perform in these two different arenas. In our study, the research gap will help to address the struggles of student athletes dealing with stress and pressure both in sports and class towards their academic performance. The researcher has not come across a study that specifically discussed the struggle among the student athletes in University of Mindanao, but also on how the respondents cope up the situation. Furthermore, this study will provide relevant concepts that would possibly help the future researcher. As the researcher found, particularly among our athletic classmates, some of them struggle in class because they are experiencing fatigue from training. They are unable to focus due to muscle pain, fatigue, and are more likely to fall asleep during class. The researchers created this study to depict what it's like for a student athlete to deal with stress and strain in both athletics and academics. The reason why we prompted to propose the research problem because not only in the University of Mindanao student athletes are affected by this kind of problem. We found out that student athletes around the world struggles to balance the demands of both of their sporting and educational roles. Student athletes experience specific problems like physical and social issues, tiredness, nutritional awareness, procrastination, and personal sacrifices. Despite of that, they all want to pursue both of their education and sport. In the help of our study, we want to give a conclusion about the problem so that it will give knowledge and information on how to deal with the stress and pressure both in sports and class. It is also beneficial to student athletes, teachers, and parents to know what should be done and what to avoid in dealing these phenomena. Research questions. Number 1. What are the life experience of student athletes who have experienced different types of struggles? Number 2. How does it affect the student athlete's academic performance in school? Number 3. What insights have the student athletes who experience different kinds of struggles? And lastly, number 4. What coping strategies do athletes utilize to deal with stress both in sports and academics? Theoretical lens. This study is first glance on Lazarus and Folkman Transactional Theory of Stress and Coping, 1987. According to them, when stimuli are perceived as threatening, challenging, or hurtful, the result, distress, triggers coping techniques to manage emotions or attempts to actively address the stressors itself. Meaning, stressors can trigger a coping mechanism techniques to manage emotions. In connection to that, a student athlete struggles such as stress. According to this theory, student athlete can come up a solution of the stress they felt in both in sports and class. Also, coping process produce an outcome especially in our environment, which is reappraised on favorable, unfavorable, or unresolved. Favorable stressors gives positive emotions, while the unfavorable or unresolved elicits distress, making the individual to look for further coping options to resolve the stressors. In connection to that, when an athlete chooses to change their surroundings with positivity, they can manage their stressors in an easy way, or they can cope up with their academic and sport responsibilities so that they can balance their responsibilities as well as keeping a healthy and positive mind. We chose this theory for the reason that it will give information and knowledge of student athletes on how to deal with stress and to create a coping mechanism which can help them to lessen their burden in dealing both sports and class. The second theory is the zero-sum model theory is based on Coleman's 1961. He argued that devoting oneself to intellectual, social, or physical interests necessitates a diminution in one dedication to the other two. This theory is one person's gain is equivalent to another loss, meaning if an athlete will focus on sports, there are tendency that she will get poor academic performance. On the other hand, if an athlete focuses more on academic, also there are tendency that he or she will have a poor performance in sports. Lastly, the developmental theory. This theory is a positive among the two theory. According to Holland and Andre, athletics are considered as experiences that helps kids develop holistically. In short, engaging sports will help students athlete to develop holistically both sports and academic performance. Example of that is the student athlete's confidence, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. In connection to that, in our study, student athletes has a positive outcome on being an athlete despite of stressors that made them struggles both sports and academic performance. These are the four related review literature. Methodology, research design. A qualitative research approach for this study is choosing qualitative method, especially it is useful in covering the meaning that people give to the event that they experience. Specifically, the phenomenological method is used to understand how participants have an insight to the phenomenon being studied. Research participant. The participant of this study is the student athletes of University of Mindanao Tagum campus. So these are the reference of our study. That would be all. Thank you.